Welcome, dear friend. If you found your way here tonight, it's because some part of you is searching, perhaps searching for relief from the endless noise of a busy mind, perhaps seeking sanctuary from worry that follows you even into the quiet hours, perhaps simply longing for a peace that feels both ancient and immediate, both far away and closer than your own heartbeat. Before we begin this sacred journey together, I invite you to share where you're listening from and what time it is in your part of the world. These small details remind us that across every continent and time zone, human beings are united in this fundamental seeking. We all want peace. We all need rest. We all carry burdens we long to set down, even if just for tonight. What you're about to receive are not merely stories or philosophy. These are transmissions of wisdom that have been carried across 25 centuries, passed from teacher to student, whispered in meditation halls, and discovered in moments of profound stillness. The Buddhist teachings you'll encounter tonight have transformed countless lives, not through force or complexity, but through their remarkable simplicity and their recognition of what is true about human experience. You don't need to be Buddhist to receive these teachings. You don't need to believe anything or change your worldview. You simply need to be willing to listen with an open heart. The wisdom will work on you the way rain works on soil, gently, naturally, asking nothing but reception. Let your body settle now wherever it is. Feel the surface beneath you supporting your weight completely. You are held. You are safe. There is nothing you need to do right now except be here, breathing, listening, allowing. Your breath knows its own rhythm. Your body knows how to rest. Tonight, we will help your mind remember what your body already knows, how to let go, how to trust, how to be at peace. The Buddha, 2,500 years ago, sat beneath a tree determined to understand the nature of suffering and the path to its cessation. What he discovered that night was not a set of beliefs to be adopted, but a direct seeing into the nature of reality itself. And at the heart of his awakening was a simple, revolutionary insight that our suffering is not created by our circumstances, but by our relationship to our circumstances, by how we meet what is, by what we add to what is already here. Tonight, we will explore this insight through stories, through teachings, through the gentle unfolding of wisdom that asks not for your effort, but for your willingness to soften, to release, to come home to the present moment where peace has always been waiting. In a monastery high in the mountains of Tibet, where the air was so thin that every breath felt precious, and the silence so deep that your own heartbeat became a meditation, there lived a young monk named Tenzin. He had come to this monastery with the burning intensity that often accompanies spiritual seeking. He wanted enlightenment. He wanted to transcend suffering. He wanted to become someone other than who he was, someone wiser, calmer, more spiritually evolved. Every morning before dawn, Tenzin would rise and sit in meditation with such fierce concentration that his jaw would ache and his shoulders would knot with tension. He would try to force his mind into emptiness, battling every thought that arose, as if each thought were an enemy to be defeated. His meditation had become a war, and he was losing every battle. The other monks in the monastery seemed to possess a quality that eluded Tenzin. They moved through their days with a gentle ease, an unhurried presence that he could not access no matter how hard he tried. Their meditation appeared effortless, while his felt like climbing a mountain with stones strapped to his back. The more he witnessed their peace, the more his own agitation grew. One winter evening, as snow fell softly outside, and the monastery halls were lit by butter lamps that cast dancing shadows on ancient walls, Tenzin approached his teacher. The old lama, whose name was Dorje, sat near a window watching the snow accumulate on the courtyard stones. His presence was like the snow itself, quiet, gentle, settling naturally without effort or agenda. "Rinpoche," Tenzin said, bowing deeply, his voice tight with frustration barely contained. I have been practicing meditation for 3 years now. I sit every day. I follow all the instructions. But my mind is more chaotic than ever. I feel like I am failing at the most basic requirement of spiritual life. What am I doing wrong? Dorje turned from the window and looked at his young student with eyes that held no judgment, only infinite kindness. Tell me, he said, his voice as soft as the falling snow. When you sit in meditation, what are you trying to accomplish? I am trying to stop my thoughts, Tenzin replied immediately. I am trying to achieve the empty awareness that the texts describe. I am trying to become someone who can actually meditate properly instead of someone whose mind runs wild like an untrained animal. The old Lama nodded slowly. And how is this trying working for you? Tenzin felt something break open in his chest. It's not working at all, he admitted. And for the first time, tears came to his eyes. I feel like I'm getting worse instead of better. The harder I try, the more scattered I become. Dorje gestured for Tenzin to sit beside him at the window. They sat together in silence for several minutes, simply watching the snow fall. Each flake descended in its own time, following its own path, landing where it landed without any apparent effort or struggle. The snow did not try to fall beautifully. It simply fell, and in that natural falling, there was perfect beauty. Let me tell you something, Dorje said finally, that may change everything for you. The entire spiritual path can be summarized in one teaching, and it is this. You cannot force the flower to bloom by pulling on its petals. Tenzin looked confused. I don't understand, Rinpoche. You are trying to force your mind into a state that you believe meditation should produce. You are pulling on the petals, demanding that the flower open according to your timeline and your expectations. But consciousness does not work this way. Peace does not arrive through force. It emerges through understanding, through letting go of the very effort that blocks it. Dorje reached out and caught a snowflake on his palm. Do you see this snowflake trying to be perfect? Is it straining to fall correctly? No. It simply responds to conditions, following its nature without resistance or ambition. Your awareness is like this snowflake. When you stop interfering with it, it reveals its natural clarity. But Rinpoche, Tenzin protested, surely we must make effort in spiritual practice. Surely we cannot just be passive and expect enlightenment to arrive on its own. The old Lama smiled. There is a profound difference between wise effort and violent struggle. Wise effort creates the conditions for awakening, just as a gardener creates conditions for growth by preparing soil, providing water, ensuring proper light. But the gardener does not make the seed grow. The seed knows how to grow. The gardener's job is to stop interfering with the seed's natural wisdom. He continued, You have been treating your mind like an enemy to be conquered rather than a garden to be tended. Every thought that arises, you attack it. Every moment of distraction, you judge yourself harshly. You have created a climate of violence within your own awareness, and then you wonder why peace does not grow there. What should I do instead? Tenzin asked, and there was a quality in his voice now that had not been there before. Not the demanding tone of someone who wants to be fixed, but the open curiosity of someone ready to learn. Stop doing, Dorje said simply. Start being. Tomorrow morning, when you sit for meditation, do not try to achieve anything. Do not try to stop thoughts or create emptiness. Simply sit and be aware that you are aware. Notice thoughts when they arise, the way you might notice birds flying across the sky. You do not chase the birds. You do not fight with them. You simply observe them passing through the vast space of awareness. Over the following days, Tenzin practiced what his teacher had suggested, though it went against every instinct his goal-oriented mind possessed. Each morning, Instead of approaching meditation as a battle to be won, he would simply sit and notice. Thoughts came, and he would observe them without warfare. Sometimes many thoughts, sometimes fewer thoughts. But he stopped making the presence or absence of thoughts mean anything about his worth or his progress. Something began to shift, subtle at first, like the first warmth of spring that you can't quite name but can definitely feel. The quality of his meditation changed, not because his mind became suddenly empty or peaceful, but because he was no longer at war with his own experience. He was learning to be the space that held all experience rather than the fighter trying to control what experience was allowed to exist. One morning, about 2 weeks into this new approach, Tenzin was sitting in the meditation hall when something remarkable happened. He was aware of thoughts moving through his mind, the usual parade of memories, plans, judgments, and observations. But suddenly, he noticed something he had never noticed before. There was awareness of these thoughts. Something was watching the thoughts, something that was not itself a thought. This awareness was utterly still, completely peaceful, naturally present without any effort to maintain it. It had been there all along, in every meditation session, in every moment of his life. But he had been so busy fighting with the contents of awareness that he had never noticed awareness itself. In that moment, Tenzin understood what his teacher had been pointing toward. Peace was not something to be achieved by eliminating thoughts. Peace was the nature of awareness itself, always present, always available, simply waiting to be recognized. All his struggle had been like someone standing in water complaining about being thirsty, not realizing that what they sought was already everywhere around them. When he shared this experience with Dorje later that day, the old Lama's face lit up with a joy that seemed to illuminate the entire room. "Now you have tasted it," he said. "Now you know the difference between trying to create peace and recognizing the peace that is your fundamental nature. The path from here is simply learning to remember this recognition more and more frequently until it becomes your natural resting place." But Tenzin had questions. If awareness is naturally peaceful, why do we suffer so much? Why does it feel like we must work so hard to access what you say is already present? Dorje settled into his teaching posture the way he did when he was about to share something important, because we have been conditioned to identify with the contents of awareness rather than with awareness itself. From the time we were very young, we learned to say, "I am sad," rather than "sadness is present." We learned to say, "I am angry," rather than "anger is arising in awareness." This identification with temporary states creates the illusion that we are small, limited, vulnerable beings, affected and damaged by every passing experience. He continued, "When you identify completely with a thought, you become that thought. When you identify completely with an emotion, you become that emotion. And when painful thoughts and emotions arise, as they inevitably do in human life, you experience yourself as painful, as damaged, as something that needs to be fixed. But this is a case of mistaken identity. You are not the thoughts and emotions. You are the awareness in which they appear and disappear." The old Lama used an analogy that made everything crystallize for Tenzin. Imagine the sky. Clouds pass through the sky, sometimes dark storm clouds, sometimes light fluffy clouds, sometimes no clouds at all. But the sky itself is never damaged by the clouds. The sky does not become a dark sky because dark clouds pass through it. The sky remains sky, vast and clear and unchanging, simply providing the space in which all weather occurs. Your awareness is like the sky. Thoughts and emotions are like the weather. They come and go. Sometimes pleasant weather, sometimes difficult weather. But the awareness that witnesses all of this is never damaged, never diminished, never truly affected by what passes through it. When you recognize yourself as the sky rather than as the clouds, suffering loses its power over you. But how do we maintain this recognition? Tenzin asked. I have tasted it once, but already I can feel myself forgetting, getting pulled back into identification with thoughts and emotions. Dorje smiled gently. This is why we call it practice. Recognition must be cultivated, remembered, returned to again and again until it becomes more familiar than the old habit of identification. Every time you notice you have become lost in a thought, believing it completely, that moment of noticing is itself a moment of freedom. That noticing is awareness recognizing itself. He offered Tenzin a practice. Throughout your day, as often as you remember, pause and ask yourself, what is aware right now? Don't try to answer the question intellectually. Simply turn your attention back toward the awareness that is looking out through your eyes, listening through your ears, knowing your experience. In that turning back, you reconnect with your true nature. Over the months that followed, Tenzin discovered that this simple practice transformed not just his meditation, but his entire relationship with life. When difficult emotions arose, instead of identifying with them completely, he would remember to ask, what is aware of this emotion? And in that asking, he would find himself resting as the awareness that held the emotion without being overwhelmed by it. When conflicts arose with other monks, instead of getting completely lost in his defensive reactions, he would remember, what is aware of this defensiveness? And space would open around the reactivity, allowing him to respond with wisdom rather than just react from conditioning. When pleasant experiences came, instead of grasping at them, desperately trying to make them permanent, he would rest as the awareness that enjoyed them without clinging. And paradoxically, this made the pleasant experiences even more enjoyable because they were not clouded by the fear of their ending. The teaching that Dorje had given Tenzin was one of the most essential in all of Buddhism, the teaching of recognizing awareness itself, sometimes called Rigpa in Tibetan Buddhism, or simply Buddha nature. It points to the fact that what you fundamentally are is not the changing contents of your experience, but the unchanging awareness that knows all experience. This recognition does not eliminate difficulty from life. Tenzin still experienced sadness, still felt anger, still faced challenges, but his relationship with these experiences had fundamentally changed. He no longer believed he was damaged by them. He no longer felt he needed to eliminate them to be at peace. He had discovered the peace that is always present, the awareness that is never disturbed, regardless of what weather passes through the sky. As you rest here now, listening to these words, you can begin to practice what Tenzin learned. Notice that there is awareness present right now. You are aware of these words, aware of sounds in your environment, aware of sensations in your body, aware of thoughts passing through your mind. This awareness that notices everything, what is its nature? Is it disturbed? Is it damaged by what it witnesses? Or is it like the sky, vast and clear and fundamentally at peace? You don't need to create this awareness. It is already here. It has been here your entire life, closer to you than your own breath. The practice is simply learning to recognize it and rest in it, to remember again and again that you are not the weather passing through the sky of consciousness. You are the sky itself. Let your breathing soften now. Feel how breath moves in and out without your control or management. This is happening within awareness. Feel any sensations in your body, any tension or relaxation. This too is appearing in awareness. Notice any thoughts about whether you are doing this correctly or understanding properly. Even these thoughts are just more weather in the sky of awareness. Rest as the awareness that holds it all, not trying to change anything, not trying to achieve any special state, simply being what you already are, the peaceful, spacious awareness in which all of life appears and disappears like clouds in an infinite sky. In a small village at the foot of great mountains, where morning mist would rise from the valley like prayers becoming visible, there lived a woman named Ayame, who carried a burden that grew heavier with each passing year. Her husband had died suddenly when their children were still young, leaving her alone to manage the family farm, raise 3 children, and navigate a life she had never imagined living. For 5 years, Ayame had held everything together through sheer force of will. She worked from before dawn until after dark, never allowing herself to rest, never permitting herself to feel the full weight of her loss. She believed that if she stopped moving, stopped working, stopped being strong, everything would collapse. So she pushed forward, day after day, season after season, running from her own grief like someone running from a shadow that no amount of speed can outpace. But the human heart can only bear so much before it begins to break in ways that cannot be ignored. Ayame found herself waking in the night with a crushing sensation in her chest, as if a great stone had been placed there while she slept. During the day, waves of sorrow would ambush her at unexpected moments. She would be working in the field and suddenly find herself unable to move, unable to breathe, overtaken by a grief so profound it felt like drowning. Her neighbors, concerned by the dark circles under her eyes and the way her body seemed to be folding in on itself, suggested she visit the Buddhist nun who lived in a small hermitage at the edge of the village. Sister Keiko was known for her wisdom and compassion, though she rarely left her simple dwelling or sought out company. Ayame resisted at first. She did not have time for spiritual matters. She had children to feed, a farm to run, responsibilities that could not be postponed for something as indulgent as tending to her own pain. But one morning, after a particularly difficult night where the crushing weight on her chest had made sleep impossible, she found her feet carrying her to the nun's dwelling, almost without conscious decision. Sister Keiko was sweeping the path in front of her small hut when Ayame arrived. The nun was ancient, her face mapped with lines that spoke of a long life fully lived, but her movements were graceful and unhurried. She looked up as Ayame approached, and something in her eyes, a quality of complete acceptance, made Ayame's carefully maintained composure finally crumble. "I don't know why I came here," Ayame said, tears streaming down her face without permission. "I don't have time for this. I should be working. I have so much to do. I shouldn't be falling apart like this." Sister Keiko set aside her broom and gestured for Ayame to sit on a simple wooden bench beneath a cherry tree. She sat beside her and said nothing, simply being present while Ayame cried tears she had held back for 5 years. The nun's silence was not empty or uncomfortable. It was full, spacious, like a container, large enough to hold whatever needed to be held. When Ayame's tears finally slowed, she began to speak. "My husband died 5 years ago. I thought I needed to be strong for my children, to keep everything running as if nothing had changed. But I feel like I'm drowning. There is this weight on my chest that grows heavier every day. I can't sleep. I can't breathe properly. I don't know what's wrong with me." Sister Keiko listened with complete attention, her eyes never leaving Ayame's face. When Ayame finished speaking, the nun was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, "Tell me, when your husband was alive, if one of your children fell and scraped their knee, how would you respond?" Ayame was puzzled by the question. "I would clean the wound, I suppose, put medicine on it, bandage it if needed. And would you tell the child that they shouldn't be bleeding? Would you scold them for having a wound? Would you tell them to stop being hurt and just be strong?" "Of course not," Ayame said. "That would be cruel." The nun nodded. "And yet this is exactly what you have been doing to yourself. You have a wound in your heart, a deep wound caused by devastating loss. But instead of tending to this wound with care and compassion, you have been telling it that it shouldn't exist. You have been scolding yourself for being hurt. You have been demanding that you simply be strong and push through, as if grief were weakness rather than love with nowhere to go. Ayame felt these words land in a place deeper than thought. She had never considered her grief this way before, as something that deserved care rather than something to be overcome. Sister Keiko continued, her voice gentle but clear. In Buddhism, we teach that resistance to what is already present is the source of our deepest suffering. Your husband is gone. This is an unchangeable reality, and it is devastating. The grief you feel is not wrong or weak or something to be eliminated. It is the natural human response to losing someone you love deeply. The problem is not that you have grief. The problem is that you have been at war with your grief, trying to force it away, judge it as unacceptable, push it down so you can appear strong. But grief is like water, the nun explained. When you try to hold it back with force, it builds pressure behind the dam. Eventually, the dam will break, often at the worst possible time. But when you allow grief to flow naturally, when you make space for it and let it move through you, it completes its natural cycle. It doesn't disappear, but it transforms from something that controls you into something you can carry with wisdom and grace. How do I do that? Ayame asked. How do I stop fighting it? You begin by accepting that grief is here. Not accepting in the sense of liking it or wanting it, but accepting in the sense of acknowledging what is true. Grief is present. This is a fact, like the fact that the sky is above us. When you stop arguing with facts, you free enormous energy that was being wasted in that argument. Sister Keiko suggested a practice. When the grief comes, instead of pushing it away or judging yourself for feeling it, I want you to welcome it like a guest who has traveled a long way to reach you. Say to it, silently or aloud, I see you, grief. I know you are here. You are welcome. You can stay as long as you need. This suggestion felt revolutionary to Ayame. Her entire approach had been to resist, to suppress, to force the grief away so she could function. The idea of welcoming it seemed counterintuitive, even frightening. What if welcoming it meant being overwhelmed by it? What if it never left once she opened the door? The nun seemed to read her thoughts. You fear that if you allow yourself to fully feel the grief, it will destroy you. But I promise you this, resisting the grief is what is actually destroying you. The crushing weight on your chest, the sleepless nights, the sense of drowning, these are not caused by the grief itself, but by your constant battle against it. When you finally stop fighting and simply allow the grief to be present, you will discover that you are much stronger than you realized. You can hold grief without being broken by it. Over the following weeks, Ayame practiced what Sister Keiko had taught her. The first time she consciously welcomed her grief instead of pushing it away, she was terrified. She was alone in her house after putting the children to bed, and the familiar crushing sensation began in her chest. Instead of immediately trying to distract herself with work or forcing herself to think about something else, she sat down, placed her hand on her heart, and whispered, I see you, grief. You are welcome here. What happened next surprised her completely. The grief, instead of overwhelming her as she had feared, simply moved through her in waves. She cried, deeply and fully, in a way she had not allowed herself to cry since the funeral. But the crying had a different quality than the desperate, choked sobbing she sometimes experienced at night. This crying felt like a release, like something held too long was finally being expressed. After perhaps 20 minutes, the wave of grief passed, and Ayame found herself sitting in her quiet house, feeling something she had not felt in 5 years, peace. Not happiness, not the absence of sadness, but a deep, settled peace. The crushing weight on her chest had lifted. She could breathe fully for the first time in months. This did not mean her grief disappeared forever. It returned many times in the days and weeks that followed. But each time, Ayame practiced the same welcoming. Instead of treating grief as an enemy that needed to be defeated, she learned to treat it as a messenger carrying important truth. That she had loved deeply, that loss was real, that her heart was tender and human and working exactly as hearts are meant to work when they encounter devastating loss. Something else began to shift as well. As Ayame stopped using all her energy to suppress her grief, that energy became available for other things. She found she could be more present with her children, could actually enjoy moments with them instead of just managing them. She could work in the fields without the desperate, driven quality that had characterized her labor before. She could even laugh again, genuine laughter that came from a place deeper than the surface performance of being okay. One afternoon, several months after her first visit to Sister Keiko, Ayame returned to the nun's hermitage to share what she had discovered. "I am still sad," she told the nun. "I still miss my husband every day. But the sadness no longer feels like it's destroying me. It's just here, present, like the weather. Some days heavier, some days lighter, but no longer crushing me because I'm not fighting it anymore." Sister Keiko smiled with deep satisfaction. "Now you understand one of Buddhism's most profound teachings, that acceptance is not resignation or defeat. Acceptance is the foundation of genuine healing and transformation. You cannot heal what you refuse to acknowledge. You cannot work skillfully with experiences you deny or suppress." The nun continued, "Many people misunderstand what we mean by acceptance in Buddhism. They think we are teaching passivity, that we should accept injustice or abuse or harmful situations without trying to change them. But this is not what acceptance means. Acceptance means recognizing clearly what is actually present in this moment, without the distortion of denial or the burden of resistance. From that clear seeing, wise action becomes possible." She used an analogy that Ayame would remember for the rest of her life. If you are walking through a forest and you encounter a fallen tree blocking your path, acceptance means seeing clearly that the tree is there. You don't waste energy wishing the tree weren't there, or arguing with the tree, or telling yourself that trees shouldn't fall across paths. You simply see tree blocking path. From that clear seeing, you can make wise choices. Perhaps you climb over it, perhaps you go around it, perhaps you turn back and find another route. But all of these choices become available only after you accept that the tree is actually there. Your grief is like the fallen tree. It is there. It is real. Arguing with its presence doesn't move it. Pretending it isn't there doesn't help you navigate around it. But accepting that it is there, seeing it clearly without judgment, allows you to work with it skillfully. And you have discovered that when you stop fighting your grief and simply let it be present, it transforms from an enemy into a teacher, from a burden into a testament to love. Ayame returned to her life with this new understanding woven into her being. She did not become someone who never felt sad or never struggled. Life continued to present its challenges. Her children had their difficulties. The farm had its seasons of abundance and scarcity, but she moved through all of it with a different quality of presence, with the wisdom that came from learning to accept what is, rather than constantly demanding that reality be different. Years later, when one of her daughters experienced her own devastating loss, Ayame was able to share what Sister Keiko had taught her. She held her daughter while she cried and whispered, "Your grief is welcome here. Let it be as large as it needs to be. You are strong enough to hold it. This is not weakness. This is love finding its voice." The teaching that Sister Keiko offered Ayame is at the heart of Buddhist wisdom about suffering. The Buddha's first noble truth states that dukkha, often translated as suffering, is an inherent part of existence. But the second noble truth identifies the cause of suffering, not the painful events themselves, but our relationship with those events, specifically our craving for things to be other than they are. When loss comes, grief naturally arises. This is not suffering in the Buddhist sense. This is simply pain, the natural response of a heart that has loved. Suffering is what we add when we resist that grief, when we judge it as wrong, when we demand that we should be over it by now, when we fight against the reality of what we feel. The pain plus the resistance equals suffering. But when we practice acceptance, meeting our experience with clarity and compassion rather than judgment and resistance, something remarkable happens. The pain remains, but the suffering dissolves. We discover that we can be with difficulty without being destroyed by it. We find that our capacity to hold human experience is far greater than we imagined. Feel into your own experience right now. What are you resisting in this moment? Perhaps there is some physical discomfort, some tension in your body. Notice what happens when you stop fighting it and simply acknowledge. Tension is present. Perhaps there is some emotion lingering, some sadness or worry or restlessness. What shifts when you welcome it rather than push it away? The practice is simple but profound. When you notice resistance, when you feel yourself fighting against what is already present, pause, take one conscious breath, and then extend an invitation to your experience. You are welcome here. I will not fight you. I will meet you with awareness and kindness. This does not mean you enjoy everything that arises. Ayame did not enjoy her grief, but she learned to stop adding the suffering of resistance to the pain of loss. She learned that acceptance creates space for healing, that resistance always prevents. In a monastery where monks spent years studying Buddhist philosophy and memorizing ancient texts, there was a young scholar named Ryushin who knew more about Buddhism than many of his teachers. He could recite sutras flawlessly, explain complex philosophical concepts with precision, and win debates about the nature of emptiness or the meaning of enlightenment. Other monks sought him out when they had questions about doctrine or needed help understanding difficult passages in the texts, but Ryushin had a problem that he spoke about with no one. Despite all his knowledge about Buddhism, he felt no peace. He understood intellectually that attachment causes suffering, but he was deeply attached to his reputation as a scholar. He could explain the teaching about non-self, but he still took every criticism personally, still compared himself to others constantly, still felt the sting of jealousy when other monks received praise. He knew what Buddhism taught about presence and mindfulness, but his mind was always somewhere else, rehearsing past conversations or planning future ones, never fully here in the moment actually unfolding. His vast knowledge felt increasingly hollow, like elaborate wrapping around an empty box. One autumn, a new monk arrived at the monastery. His name was Satetsu, and he was unusual in every way. He had not come to study texts or master philosophy. He had spent 20 years working as a farmer before some unnamed crisis had brought him to the monastery in his middle age. He struggled to memorize even basic chants. He asked questions that revealed he had no background in Buddhist philosophy. Some of the scholarly monks dismissed him as simple, perhaps not suited for the intellectual rigor of monastic life. But Ryushin noticed something about Satetsu that disturbed him. Despite knowing almost nothing about Buddhism in an academic sense, this simple farmer possessed a quality of peace that Ryushin had been seeking his entire life. Satetsu moved through his days with an unhurried presence. When he worked in the monastery garden, he seemed completely absorbed in the work, not mentally somewhere else. When he sat in meditation, his face reflected a depth of stillness that Ryushin had never accessed despite years of practice. One day, Ryushin's curiosity overcame his pride. He approached Satetsu in the garden where the older monk was pulling weeds with careful attention. "Brother Satetsu," Ryushin said, trying to keep his voice casual, "I wonder if I might ask you something. You seem very peaceful, very content. What is your practice?" What teachings do you follow? Satetsu looked up with a warm smile, genuine pleasure at being addressed. His face was weathered from years of outdoor work, and his hands were calloused and soil-stained. I don't know if I have a practice in the way you probably mean, he said. I just try to be here, doing what I'm doing. Right now, I'm pulling weeds, so I pull weeds. That's all. Ryushin felt a flash of irritation. Surely it couldn't be that simple. But what about all the teachings, he pressed? What about understanding emptiness, or realizing non-self, or achieving enlightenment? Don't these matter to you? Satetsu sat back on his heels, considering the question with genuine thoughtfulness. I don't know much about those things, he admitted. I can barely remember the sutras we chant, but I'll tell you what I learned from 20 years of farming. When you plant seeds, you prepare the soil, you plant carefully, you water and tend, but then you must let go. You cannot force the seed to grow faster by pulling on the shoot. The seed knows how to become a plant. Your job is just to provide good conditions and then trust. He pulled another weed and continued, I think maybe spiritual life is like this. I show up every day. I do my work with care. I try to be kind. I sit in meditation even though I don't understand all the philosophy. These are the conditions I can create. But whatever is supposed to grow from this, I cannot force it. I just trust and keep tending. Something in these simple words touched Ryushin more deeply than years of complex philosophy. That evening, he sat in meditation with a different intention. Instead of trying to achieve some special state or demonstrate his understanding of advanced techniques, he simply sat, like Satetsu pulling weeds. Ryushin just sat, breathing, being present with what was actually here rather than what he thought should be here. His mind still wandered, still produced its usual stream of thoughts, but instead of judging this as failure or fighting to control it, he simply noticed, thinking about tomorrow, planning a response to yesterday's conversation, worrying about whether he was meditating correctly. Each time he noticed thinking, he gently returned to breathing, to presence, without warfare or judgment. After about 30 minutes of this gentler practice, something unexpected happened. There was a gap between thoughts, just a few seconds where no thinking was present. And in that gap, Ryushin experienced something he had read about countless times, but never directly known. Simple awareness, present and clear and utterly peaceful, not because it had achieved anything, but because it had stopped trying to achieve anything. The experience lasted only a moment before thinking resumed, but in that moment, Ryushin understood something profound. All his years of studying about enlightenment had kept him one step removed from the direct experience of awakened awareness. He had been so busy accumulating knowledge about the moon that he had forgotten to look at the moon itself. Over the following weeks, Ryushin found himself spending more time with Satetsu, ostensibly to help the older monk understand basic teachings, but actually to learn something his books had never taught him. He learned it not through words, but through watching how Satetsu lived, the way he ate his meals with complete attention, not reading or thinking, but simply tasting, the way he walked from one place to another, as if walking itself were sacred, not merely a means to get somewhere else, the way he listened when someone spoke, with his whole being, not just his ears. One afternoon, they were working together in the garden, and Ryushin had been explaining some complex philosophical concept while they worked. Satetsu listened politely, but when Ryushin finished, the older monk asked a question that shifted everything. Brother Ryushin, do you think the cabbages we're planting care about emptiness and form? Do they need to understand non-duality to grow properly? Ryushin laughed despite himself. Of course not. Then why do you think you need to understand all these concepts to be at peace? Can't you be at peace the way cabbages grow? By simply being what you are, responding to conditions, trusting your nature? But humans are different from cabbages. Ryushin protested, though he could feel something loosening in him even as he argued. We have minds that think, that question, that seek meaning. Yes, Satetsu agreed, reaching for another cabbage seedling. And that's wonderful. Thinking is a beautiful capacity, but you have made thinking your master instead of your tool. You think about peace instead of being peaceful. You think about presence instead of being present. You think about enlightenment instead of living enlightened. He tamped soil around the seedling and looked at Ryushin with eyes that held no judgment, only kindness. Maybe true understanding isn't in the head at all. Maybe it's in the hands that tend the garden without complaint, in the feet that walk without rushing, in the heart that opens without calculation. All your knowledge is like a map of a country, but Ryushin, you have to actually visit the country. The map is not the same as the territory. That evening, during the monastery's formal study period, Ryushin opened one of the ancient texts he had read dozens of times. But this time, he read differently. Instead of trying to memorize or analyze, he read slowly, feeling for the living truth the words were pointing toward. And he discovered that the texts had been saying all along what Satetsu had shown him through his simple presence, that awakening is not something to be understood, but something to be lived, not something to know about, but something to be. In the months that followed, Ryushin's entire relationship with his spiritual practice transformed. He still studied texts, but now he studied them the way one might study poetry, feeling for the truth beneath the words rather than just collecting information. He still engaged in philosophical discussion, but now he cared more about whether understanding was actually changing how he lived than whether he could win debates. Most importantly, he began to practice what Satetsu had been teaching through his example, the art of being fully present with whatever he was doing. When he walked, he walked. When he ate, he ate. When he studied with full attention. And slowly, naturally, without force or striving, a quality of peace began to emerge that all his years of accumulated knowledge had never produced. The other monks noticed the change in Ryushin. His energy was different, less intense and driven, more settled and easeful. One of the younger monks asked him what had caused this transformation. Ryushin smiled and gestured toward Satetsu, who was across the courtyard sweeping leaves with the same unhurried attention he brought to everything. That monk there, Ryushin said, knows almost nothing about Buddhist philosophy, but he taught me something more important than anything in the sutras. He taught me that wisdom is not something you accumulate in your head, it's something you embody in your life. He showed me that the point is not to know about the Buddha's teachings, but to become a living expression of those teachings. The young monk looked confused. But surely understanding is important. We can't just abandon learning and study. Of course, study has value, Ryushin agreed, but only if it leads to transformation. Only if the knowing moves from your head to your hands and feet and heart. Satetsu taught me that a farmer who tends his garden with complete presence, who lives with kindness and simplicity, who meets each moment without resistance, that farmer is closer to enlightenment than a scholar who knows every sutra but lives with anxiety, competition, and constant mental noise. He paused, watching Satetsu sweep. The teaching is simple, almost too simple for complicated minds like mine to grasp at first. Just be here. Just do what you're doing. Just open to this moment without all the stories and strategies and seeking. That's it. That's the whole path. Everything else is just commentary. This story reveals something essential about the difference between intellectual knowledge and embodied wisdom. In Buddhism, this distinction is captured in the difference between what is called knowing about and knowing directly. You can know about water by studying its chemical composition, understanding its properties, memorizing facts about it. but you know water directly by drinking it, by swimming in it, by feeling it on your skin. Most spiritual seeking operates at the level of knowing about. We read books, attend teachings, collect concepts and practices. We can explain what mindfulness means, what compassion requires, what enlightenment entails. But until these understandings move from the intellect to lived experience, they remain mere information, helpful perhaps, but not transformative. The farmer monk understood something profound that the scholar had missed. That presence, the simple act of being fully here with what you're actually doing, is itself the practice and the goal. Not presence as a stepping stone to some future achievement, but presence as the natural expression of your awakened nature. Notice right now the difference between thinking about being present and actually being present. When you think about presence, there's a subtle sense of separation, of you trying to achieve a state called presence. But actual presence is simply this: awareness of breath moving, awareness of sounds arising, awareness of sensations in the body, awareness of these words being received. No effort, no trying, just the natural clarity of awareness meeting experience directly. The farmer's teaching that you cannot force a seed to grow by pulling on it applies to every aspect of spiritual development. You cannot force yourself to be peaceful by fighting with your anxiety. You cannot force compassion by judging your judgmental thoughts. You cannot force awakening by striving desperately to achieve it. These efforts are like pulling on the shoot, interfering with the natural unfolding that wants to happen. What you can do is create conditions: good soil, proper water, adequate light. In spiritual terms, this means showing up for practice, cultivating ethical behavior, surrounding yourself with wisdom, and then, this is crucial, trusting. Trusting that awareness knows how to awaken to itself. Trusting that your deepest nature is already peaceful, already whole, already complete. Trusting that your job is not to create something new, but to remove the obstacles that obscure what has always been present. Let yourself feel into this trust right now. Your body is breathing without your management. Your heart is beating without your instruction. Countless processes are maintaining your life this very moment without any conscious control. There is a wisdom operating that is far deeper than the thinking mind. The same wisdom that grows seeds into plants, that heals wounds, that organizes the entire cosmos. This wisdom is your fundamental nature. Can you trust it? Can you stop trying so hard and simply allow? In a coastal village where fishermen left before dawn and returned with the evening tide, there lived a man named Kenji who was known throughout the region for his terrible temper. Small frustrations would send him into rages. Delays would provoke outbursts of anger that frightened his family and alienated his neighbors. He was not a cruel man by nature, but his inability to manage his anger had created a life marked by broken relationships and constant inner turmoil. Kenji knew his anger was a problem. He had tried countless times to control it through sheer willpower. He would promise himself each morning that today he would remain calm, that he would not let anything provoke him. But by noon, some small thing would happen. A tool would break, someone would say something he perceived as disrespectful, and the rage would overtake him like a wave he was powerless to resist. His wife, Hana, loved him but was weary from years of walking on eggshells, never knowing what small thing might trigger an explosion. Their children had learned to be very quiet, very careful, their natural childhood exuberance dampened by the need to avoid provoking their father's temper. Kenji could see what his anger was doing to his family, which only made him angrier at himself, creating a vicious cycle of rage and self-hatred. One day, after a particularly shameful outburst where he had shouted at his youngest son over a spilled cup of tea, Kenji sat alone on the beach watching the waves roll in with their eternal rhythm. He felt defeated, hopeless, about ever changing. A voice beside him said gently, "The ocean is angry today." Kenji looked up to see an old monk standing nearby, his robes worn and patched, his face deeply lined but somehow peaceful. "The ocean looks angry," Kenji corrected automatically. "But it's not actually angry. It's just water moved by wind and tide. It doesn't have emotions." The monk smiled and sat down on the sand beside Kenji. "Exactly right. The ocean looks turbulent, but the water itself is not suffering from its own turbulence. It simply moves as conditions require." "Why do you think human anger is different?" Kenji felt defensive. "Because humans aren't water. We have minds, feelings, choices. Do we?" the monk asked. "When anger arises in you, did you choose it? Did you sit down this morning and decide, 'Today I will feel rage when my son spills tea'?" "Of course not," Kenji said bitterly. "If I could choose, I would never feel angry. My anger destroys everything I love. So anger arises without your permission, much like waves arise in the ocean. And tell me, when you fight against the anger, when you hate yourself for feeling it, does this make the anger weaker or stronger?" Kenji had never considered this question. "Stronger," he admitted. "The more I hate my anger, the angrier I become, at myself, at the situation, at everything." The monk nodded, as if this confirmed something important. "Let me tell you what Buddhism teaches about anger. We do not teach that anger is wrong or that feeling it makes you a bad person. Anger is a natural human emotion that arises under certain conditions, like waves arising in the ocean. The suffering comes not from anger itself, but from your relationship with anger." "What do you mean?" "Right now, you have anger, which is unpleasant, but you also have hatred of your anger, shame about your anger, fear of your anger, judgment about what your anger means about you. So you are carrying not just one burden, but many. The original anger plus all these reactions to the anger. This is what makes it unbearable." The monk drew a pattern in the sand. "Imagine anger as a fire. When you pour fuel on a fire, you make it bigger. Every time you judge yourself for being angry, you are pouring fuel on the fire. Every time you fight against the anger, you are creating resistance that makes it burn hotter. Every time you tell yourself you shouldn't feel this way, you add another log." "So what should I do?" Kenji asked. "Just let myself be angry? Let it destroy my family?" The monk shook his head. "There is a middle way between indulging anger and suppressing it. This way involves first accepting that anger is present, meeting it with awareness rather than judgment. When you feel anger arising, instead of immediately identifying with it and acting it out, or trying to push it away and pretend it's not there, you simply notice, anger is here." Kenji looked skeptical. "Just noticing it will make it go away?" "Not immediately, no. But noticing creates space. In that space, you are no longer completely identified with the anger. There is anger, yes, but there is also the awareness that knows anger is present. This awareness is not angry. It is like the space in which waves move, unaffected by the waves themselves." The monk continued, "Buddhism teaches that emotions are like weather. They arise due to conditions. They have their time, and they pass. Anger is like a storm cloud. It arrives, it releases its rain, it moves on. But we humans do something that makes it worse. We grab onto the storm cloud, and we don't let it go. We tell stories about it. We justify it. We feed it. We make it about our identity. I am an angry person. This is who I am. And by doing this, we turn what could be a passing storm into permanent bad weather." "So how do I let it pass?" Kenji asked. "By being present with it without adding story or judgment. The next time you feel anger arising, try this practice. Stop whatever you're doing. Place your hand on your heart. Take 3 conscious breaths. And with each breath, acknowledge, anger is here. I see you, anger. You are allowed to be here. Then, notice what the anger actually feels like in your body, not what you think about it, but the actual sensations. Heat, perhaps, tension, energy moving. Simply feel those sensations without acting on them. But won't this take too long? What if I need to respond to the situation? The monk smiled. Those 3 breaths take perhaps 15 seconds. And I promise you, any response you make after 15 seconds of conscious presence will be wiser than the reaction you would have had if you exploded immediately. The pause creates space for wisdom to emerge instead of conditioned reactivity. Over the following weeks, Kenji practiced what the monk had taught him. The first time he felt anger rising, he was working on his boat and a piece of equipment broke. His usual pattern would have been to hurl the tool into the water while shouting curses. Instead, he remembered the teaching. He stopped, placed his hand on his heart, took 3 slow breaths, and with each breath acknowledged, anger is here. Something remarkable happened. The anger didn't immediately disappear, but the urgent quality of it diminished. There was space between the feeling and his response. He could feel the heat in his chest, the tension in his jaw, the energy wanting to explode outward. But by being present with these sensations rather than immediately acting on them, he discovered they weren't as overwhelming as they felt when he was completely identified with them. After the 3 breaths, he looked at the broken equipment and realized he could simply get another piece. It was inconvenient, not catastrophic. The anger began to dissipate naturally, like a wave that had crested and was now receding. For the first time in his life, Kenji had experienced anger without being controlled by it. This didn't mean he never felt angry again. Anger still arose, sometimes intensely. But his relationship with anger was transforming. Instead of being anger, he could be aware of anger. Instead of anger being his identity, it became weather passing through the vast sky of his awareness. The change affected his entire family. His wife noticed that when Kenji became frustrated, he would pause, breathe, and often speak about what he was feeling instead of exploding. I'm feeling angry right now, he might say. I need a moment to be with this. This honesty was so different from his previous pattern of denial followed by explosion that Hana felt safer than she had in years. His children began to relax. The house was no longer a minefield where any misstep could trigger catastrophe. They started to laugh more, to play more freely, and Kenji discovered that witnessing his children's natural joy, which his anger had been suppressing, brought him more happiness than he had thought possible. Several months after his encounter with the monk, Kenji returned to the beach hoping to thank him. He found the old monk sitting in almost the same spot, watching the waves. Kenji sat beside him without speaking, simply being present with the sound of the ocean, the feeling of sand beneath him, the vast openness of the sky. After a while, Kenji spoke. Teacher, you changed my life. My family is healing. I am healing. The anger still comes, but it no longer controls me. How can I thank you? The monk turned to him with eyes full of warmth. You are already thanking me by living differently. But tell me, what have you learned from your practice? Kenji considered carefully. I learned that I am not my anger, that there is awareness that can hold anger without being consumed by it. I learned that meeting anger with acceptance rather than judgment makes it workable instead of overwhelming. And I learned that the pause, those 3 breaths, creates space where wisdom can emerge. Good, the monk said. And what will you do with this learning? Kenji looked out at the ocean, at the waves that continued their eternal rhythm. I think I will teach my children what you taught me, that emotions are like weather, that they arise and pass, that we don't have to be controlled by them. I want them to grow up knowing that they are not their anger or their sadness or their fear, that they are the awareness that can hold all of these things with compassion. The monk nodded with deep satisfaction. Then you have understood the teaching completely. The practice is not just for you. When you heal your relationship with difficult emotions, you give your children a different legacy. Instead of passing on the suffering of unexamined reactivity, you pass on the freedom that comes from awareness. This teaching about working with difficult emotions is fundamental to Buddhist practice. The Buddha taught that there are two arrows of suffering. The first arrow is the painful experience itself, the anger, fear, sadness, or any difficult emotion that arises. This first arrow is natural, unavoidable, part of being human. But the second arrow is the one we shoot at ourselves, the judgment, resistance, shame, and story we add to the original feeling. This second arrow is optional, and it often causes more suffering than the first. When Kenji learned to meet his anger with awareness and acceptance rather than judgment and resistance, he was removing the second arrow. The anger still arose, the first arrow still struck. But without the additional suffering of self-hatred and resistance, the anger became workable. It could move through him naturally, like weather moving through sky, rather than getting stuck and building into storms of rage. The practice the monk taught, the pause with 3 breaths and acknowledgement, is deceptively simple but profoundly powerful. It interrupts the automatic reaction pattern that normally occurs. Typically, when anger arises, we immediately identify with it and act from it, or we immediately suppress it and pretend it's not there. Both of these responses create problems. But when we pause and simply acknowledge what's present, anger is here, we create what's called the sacred pause. In that pause, we're neither acting out the emotion nor suppressing it. We're simply being present with it, creating space around it, and in that space, the emotion reveals itself to be less solid, less permanent, less overwhelming than it seems when we're completely identified with it. Feel into your own experience right now. Is there any emotion present? Perhaps contentment, perhaps restlessness, perhaps peace, perhaps some subtle anxiety. Whatever is here, can you practice the teaching? Can you simply acknowledge it without judgment? Can you notice where you feel it in your body? Can you be present with it without needing to change it or analyze it or make it mean something about who you are? This is the practice. Not eliminating difficult emotions, which is impossible, but changing your relationship with them so they no longer control your life. Like Kenji discovering he was not his anger, you can discover you are not your anxiety, not your sadness, not your fear. You are the awareness that can hold all of these things with compassion and wisdom. In a mountain village where winter lasted 8 months and summer felt like a brief dream, there lived a community that had developed a unique tradition. Once each month, on the night of the full moon, the entire village would gather in the common hall for what they called the Council of Stones. Each villager would bring a stone they had found during the past month, and one by one, they would share a story about carrying a burden. An old woman named Grandmother Yuki had created this tradition decades earlier, based on a teaching she had received from a wandering Buddhist monk. The practice was simple but profound. When it was your turn, you would hold up your stone and speak honestly about some weight you had been carrying, a worry, a regret, a resentment, a fear, anything that had been heavy on your heart or mind. After speaking, you would place your stone in a large basket in the center of the room. At the end of the gathering, everyone would carry the basket together to the edge of the village and release all the stones into the river, watching them disappear into the flowing water. The ritual enacted physically what the villagers were practicing, internally, the art of letting go. One winter evening, a young man named Takeshi attended his first Council of Stones. He had recently moved to the village after years of living in the city, drawn by the community's reputation for wisdom and peace. He brought a stone, but he sat quietly through most of the gathering, listening as others shared their burdens. A farmer spoke about his worry that the summer harvest would fail again. A mother spoke about her fear that her daughter was making unwise choices. An old man spoke about his regret over a friendship he had destroyed with harsh words 30 years ago. Each person spoke honestly, without pretense or elaborate explanation, and each placed their stone in the basket with visible relief. When the basket came around to Takeshi, he held his stone but said nothing at first. The weight of what he carried felt too large, too shameful to share with strangers. But something about the honest vulnerability everyone else had shown made him feel safe enough to speak. "My stone represents the person I used to be," he said quietly. 3 years ago, I destroyed my marriage through my own selfishness. I betrayed my wife's trust in ways that can never be repaired. She has moved on, rebuilt her life, but I carry this guilt every day. I cannot forgive myself for the pain I caused. I feel like I don't deserve peace or happiness because of what I did. He placed his stone in the basket, but unlike the others who seemed to experience relief, Takeshi felt no lighter. The confession had brought his shame to the surface, making it feel more real and painful rather than less. After the gathering, as the villagers carried the basket together toward the river, Grandmother Yuki walked beside Takeshi. She was nearly 90 years old, her back bent but her eyes still clear and sharp. She gestured for him to walk with her at the rear of the group. "You did not feel relief when you placed your stone in the basket," she observed. "It was not a question." Takeshi shook his head. "No. If anything, I feel worse." Speaking it out loud made it more real. "And putting the stone in a basket doesn't change what I did. The guilt is still here." They walked in silence for a while, following the procession toward the river. The full moon illuminated the snowy landscape, making everything silver and ethereal. Finally, Yuki spoke. "Let me tell you something about guilt that most people don't understand. Guilt has two forms. One is useful, one is useless. Useful guilt is the immediate remorse we feel when we've caused harm. It teaches us, changes our behavior, makes us want to repair what we've broken and do better in the future. This guilt is a gift, a teacher. It serves growth. But there is another kind of guilt," she continued, "that serves no purpose at all. This is the guilt we carry long after we've learned the lesson, long after we've changed our behavior, long after any possibility of repair. This guilt is not teaching you anything new. You already know what you did was wrong. You've already changed, but you continue to punish yourself as if punishment could somehow undo the past or earn you the right to move forward." "But I hurt someone I loved," Takeshi protested. "How can I just let that go? Doesn't my wife deserve for me to suffer for what I did?" Yuki stopped walking and turned to face him. "Tell me, does your suffering help your wife in any way? Does your guilt ease her pain or improve her life?" Takeshi thought about this. "No, she's moved on. She probably never thinks about me anymore." "Then who are you punishing yourself for? If not for her benefit, then why? Do you believe you must suffer a certain amount before you earn the right to be happy again? That there is some cosmic scale where your pain balances out the pain you caused? I suppose I feel like I don't deserve peace after what I did." They had reached the riverbank now. The villagers were already releasing their stones, watching them splash into the dark water and disappear. Yuki picked up Takeshi's stone from the basket and held it out to him. "Buddhist teaching says something radical about forgiveness and guilt," she said. "It teaches that clinging to past mistakes, even terrible ones, does not serve anyone. Not the person you harmed, not yourself, not the world. Your guilt is not noble. It is not virtuous. It is simply suffering that creates more suffering, spreading outward like ripples from a thrown stone." She pressed the stone into his hand. "When you release this stone, you are not saying what you did was acceptable. You are not erasing the harm or pretending it didn't happen. You are simply acknowledging that continuing to punish yourself serves no purpose. The past cannot be changed, but the present and future can be lived differently. Takeshi looked down at the stone in his hand. It seemed to contain all his shame, all his regret, all the darkness he had been carrying. "But how do I forgive myself?" he asked. "How do I let it go when I know what I'm capable of?" Yuki's voice was gentle but firm. "You begin by understanding that the person who committed those actions 3 years ago is not exactly the same person standing here now. Every cell in your body has changed, your understanding has deepened. Your heart has opened to the suffering you caused, which itself is a transformation. The you that exists now is capable of different choices than the you that existed then." She continued, "In Buddhism, we teach that all beings contain the capacity for both harm and healing. You discovered your capacity for harm in a devastating way, but you also contain the capacity for wisdom, for compassion, for growth. The question is not whether you deserve peace. The question is whether you will use your remaining days to create more harm through self-punishment, or whether you will use them to create healing by living with greater awareness and care." The other villagers had all released their stones and were beginning to walk back toward the village. Takeshi stood at the water's edge, holding his stone. Grandmother Yuki placed her hand on his shoulder. "When you release that stone," she said, "make it a commitment. Commit to living the rest of your life in a way that honors the lesson you learned. Commit to treating others with the care you wish you had shown your wife. Commit to becoming a person who creates healing rather than harm. That is how you truly make amends, not through endless self-punishment, but through transformation and service." Takeshi felt tears streaming down his face, warm against his cold skin. He looked at the stone one more time, feeling the weight of everything it represented. Then, with a motion that felt like releasing something far heavier than a stone, he threw it into the river. The splash seemed louder than it should have been. He watched the ripples spread outward, disturbing the reflection of the moon, then gradually settling back into stillness. And in that moment, something in Takeshi's chest loosened, not completely, not permanently, but enough that he could take a full breath for the first time in 3 years. Walking back to the village with Grandmother Yuki, Takeshi asked, "Does it get easier, letting go of the past?" "Sometimes yes, sometimes no," she replied honestly. "The mind has a habit of picking up stones we've already released. You may find yourself thinking about this again, feeling guilty again. When that happens, remember that you have already released this stone. Remind yourself of your commitment to live differently, and release it again." Letting go is not a single act, but a practice we return to as many times as necessary. In the months that followed, Takeshi did find himself picking up the stone of guilt again, turning it over in his mind, sinking into familiar patterns of self-punishment. But each time he noticed this happening, he would remember the river, the splash, the commitment he had made. He would consciously choose to release the guilt again, sometimes saying aloud, "I have already learned from this. I am living differently now. The past cannot be changed, but I can choose how I meet the present." Gradually, the guilt's grip on him loosened. It didn't disappear completely. Memories and regret still arose sometimes, but they no longer controlled his life. He began to direct his energy not toward punishing himself for past mistakes, but toward living with greater consciousness and care. He volunteered in the village, helping elderly residents with tasks they could no longer manage. He listened deeply when others spoke, giving them the attention he wished he had given his wife. He practiced noticing when selfishness arose and choosing generosity instead. One day, almost a year after his first Council of Stones, Takeshi was working in the community garden when a visitor arrived in the village. She was looking for Grandmother Yuki and asked Takeshi for directions. As he pointed out Yuki's house, the woman said, "I've traveled a long way to learn about the Council of Stones practice. I heard it helps people let go of burdens they've been carrying too long." "It does," Takeshi said. Then, surprising himself, he added, "But the real teaching isn't in the releasing. It's in what you do afterward, in how you live. Once you've set down what you were carrying, that's where the true freedom is found." The woman looked at him with interest. "You sound like you've learned this deeply." Takeshi smiled, a genuine smile that reached his eyes. "I'm learning it," he said. "Every day, I'm learning it." The teaching about letting go that grandmother Yuki shared with Takeshi points to one of Buddhism's most essential understandings, that clinging to the past, whether to pleasant memories we wish could return or painful experiences we wish had never happened, creates suffering that exists only in the mind. The past itself is gone. It has no power except the power we give it through our constant mental return to what can never be changed. This doesn't mean we forget the past or pretend it didn't happen. Memory serves important functions: learning from mistakes, honoring what was precious, understanding patterns that shape our present. But there is a difference between remembering and ruminating, between learning from the past and living in it, between honoring memory and being imprisoned by it. When Takeshi threw his stone into the river, he was enacting a profound Buddhist practice, the conscious release of what no longer serves, not because the past didn't matter, but because continuing to carry it prevented him from being fully present to the life unfolding now. His guilt had become a weight that served no one, taught him nothing new, and kept him trapped in an identity formed by his worst moment rather than allowing him to grow beyond it. Feel into your own relationship with the past right now. What stones are you carrying? What old stories do you replay? What guilt, regret, or resentment has worn grooves in your mind through constant repetition? Notice how thinking about these things feels in your body. There's usually a heaviness, a contraction, a sense of being pulled away from the present moment into a time that no longer exists except in thought. The practice is to notice when you're lost in past or future, and gently, without judgment, return to now. This moment, this breath, this sensation, this sound. Right here is where your life is actually happening. Everything else is memory or imagination, both of which exist only as thoughts arising in present awareness. In a temple renowned for its teaching of meditation, there was a practice that confused many newcomers. The meditation master, a woman named Abbess Myoan, would sometimes ring a bell in the middle of a meditation session, and when she did, students were instructed to immediately stand up, bow, and leave the meditation hall, regardless of how deep their meditation had become or how much time remained in the scheduled sitting period. A dedicated student named Hiroshi found this practice intensely frustrating. He had come to the temple to develop deep meditation, to access profound states of concentration and insight. But just when he would settle into a particularly peaceful or clear state, the bell would ring and he would be forced to abandon what he had worked so hard to achieve. After several months of this frustration, Hiroshi requested a private meeting with Abbess Myoan. With barely controlled irritation, he asked, "Reverend Mother, why do we practice this? Random interruption? I come here to develop meditation, but whenever I achieve a good state, I'm forced to leave it. How can I make progress if my practice is constantly disrupted?" Myoan looked at him with eyes that held both kindness and something he couldn't quite name. "Tell me, Hiroshi, when you are sitting in meditation and a pleasant state arises, what happens in your mind?" Hiroshi considered. "I feel glad. I think, this is good meditation. This is what I've been working toward." And when that pleasant state begins to fade, as all states do, what happens? I try to hold on to it. I try to recreate the conditions that produced it, and when I can't, I feel like I'm losing my progress. Myoan nodded. "And do you see the problem? You have turned meditation into a project of acquiring good experiences and avoiding or minimizing unpleasant ones. But this is not meditation. This is spiritual greed, spiritual ambition. It is the same pattern that creates suffering in every area of life now applied to your spiritual practice. She continued, "When I ring the bell in the middle of sitting, I am teaching you the most important lesson, non-attachment, even to good meditation states, even to peace and clarity. The point is not to achieve and then cling to special experiences. The point is to develop the capacity to be fully present with whatever is arising, and then to let it go without clinging when conditions change." Hiroshi felt something shift in his understanding, though resistance remained. "But surely we're supposed to cultivate certain states in meditation. Isn't that the whole point of practice?" "We create conditions," Myoen agreed. "We sit regularly, we maintain posture, we work with attention. These are like preparing good soil for a garden, but we do not control what grows. And when something beautiful blooms, we do not rip it from the ground trying to possess it permanently. We appreciate it while it's here, and we release it when its time passes." She offered him a new instruction. "For the next month, I want you to practice meditation with a specific intention. Each time a pleasant state arises, notice it, appreciate it, and then deliberately let it go. Don't try to maintain it or intensify it. Just acknowledge, this is pleasant. This too will pass. And when an unpleasant state arises, do the same. This is difficult. This too will pass. Practice equanimity with all states, neither clinging to the pleasant nor pushing away the unpleasant." Over the following weeks, Hiroshi practiced this instruction, and it transformed his entire approach to meditation. He began to notice how much energy he had been wasting trying to maintain good experiences and avoid difficult ones. When he stopped fighting this natural flow of changing states, his practice became much more peaceful. Paradoxically, not because every moment was pleasant, but because he was no longer at war with whatever was present. One day during meditation, a state of extraordinary clarity and peace arose. His first instinct was the familiar one: try to hold it, try to stay in it. But he remembered the teaching. He acknowledged the beauty of the experience, felt gratitude for it, and then consciously relaxed his grip. And something remarkable happened. By not trying to possess the experience, by simply being present with it without clinging, it actually lasted longer and felt more profound than any meditation state he had previously grasped at. When it eventually faded, as all states do, he felt no loss or disappointment. It had come. He had been fully present with it. It had passed. This was the natural way of all experience. Fighting this flow created suffering. Accepting it created peace. After the sitting, Abbess Myoen approached him. "I saw a shift in your energy today. Tell me what you discovered." Hiroshi struggled to find words. "I think I understood for the first time that peace is not a state to be achieved and maintained. It's the capacity to be present with all states, allowing them to come and go like weather, without getting attached to the pleasant or resistant to the difficult." Myoen smiled with deep satisfaction. "Now you are practicing meditation correctly, not meditation as a project to acquire experiences, but meditation as training in the art of meeting life exactly as it is, with openness and equanimity. This is what will serve you, not just on the cushion, but in every moment of your life." She continued, "Most people come to meditation wanting to escape difficulty, to create a permanent state of peace that shields them from life's challenges. But authentic practice does something different. It develops your capacity to be with difficulty without being overwhelmed, to be with joy without clinging desperately, to meet each moment as it actually is rather than as you wish it would be." Hiroshi's practice continued to deepen over the months that followed. He began to notice that the teaching about non-attachment extended far beyond his meditation cushion. In his daily work assignments at the temple, he would notice himself clinging to pleasant tasks and resisting unpleasant ones. When given work he enjoyed, like calligraphy or garden tending, he would feel happy but also anxious about when this assignment would end. When given work he disliked, like cleaning the bathrooms or washing dishes, he would feel resentful and resistant. But now he had a practice for working with this pattern. When pleasant work came, he would acknowledge, "This is enjoyable, this too will pass." He would be fully present with the task, appreciating it completely, but without the anxious grasping that had previously shadowed his enjoyment. When difficult work came, he would acknowledge, "This is challenging, this too will pass." He would be fully present with the task, meeting its difficulty without the layer of resistance that had made it so much harder. Gradually, he discovered that this practice was revealing something profound about the nature of suffering itself. The Buddha had taught that attachment is the root of suffering, but Hiroshi was now understanding this teaching not intellectually but experientially. His suffering came not from the changing nature of experience, pleasant states giving way to difficult ones, good circumstances transforming into challenging ones, but from his demand that pleasant experiences should stay and difficult experiences should leave. When he released that demand, when he practiced equanimity with the natural flow of changing experience, suffering diminished dramatically. Not because his life became only pleasant, it remained a mix of ease and difficulty, but because he was no longer adding the suffering of resistance to whatever was already present. One evening, during the daily work period, Hiroshi was assigned to help move firewood from the storage area to the main building. It was cold, the wood was heavy, and his back ached from previous days of similar work. His first reaction was the familiar resistance. "Not this again. This is too hard. When will I get better assignments?" But he caught this pattern of thought and gently released it. He brought his attention fully to the immediate experience, the weight of the logs in his arms, the cold air on his face, the satisfaction of placing each load carefully in its designated spot, the rhythm of walking back and forth. When he stopped arguing with the reality of what he was doing and simply did it with complete presence, the work itself became a form of meditation, no less valuable than sitting on his cushion in the meditation hall. A young monk named Takeo was working alongside him, and Hiroshi could see that Takeo was struggling with the same resistance he had experienced earlier. The young monk's face was tight with frustration, his movements jerky and resentful. During a break, Takeo complained, "I didn't come to a monastery to be a manual laborer. I came to study Buddhism, to meditate, to achieve enlightenment. This kind of work is just a distraction from real practice." Hiroshi smiled, recognizing his younger self in Takeo's words. He shared what Abbess Mayoan had taught him. Every moment is practice if you meet it with awareness. The Buddha's enlightenment didn't exempt him from the activities of daily life. He still had to walk from place to place, eat meals, maintain his robes. The question is not what you're doing, but how you're meeting what you're doing. Takeo looked skeptical but curious. "So you're saying carrying firewood is the same as meditation?" "Not exactly the same," Hiroshi clarified. "But both are opportunities to practice presence, equanimity, and non-attachment. When you carry firewood while wishing you were meditating, you're not really carrying firewood, and you're not really meditating. You're lost in thought about how things should be different. But when you carry firewood with full presence, you're practicing the same awareness you cultivate in formal meditation. And perhaps more importantly, you're learning to bring practice into ordinary life, which is where it matters most." He continued, "Abbess Mioen taught me that we practice non-attachment not just to special meditation experiences, but to our ideas about what spiritual life should look like. You came here with a picture in your mind of what a monk's life would be: serene meditation in beautiful halls, profound teachings, mystical experiences. But actual monastic life includes cleaning toilets and carrying firewood. The spiritual practice is meeting the reality with presence rather than constantly arguing that reality should match your picture. Something in Takeo's expression shifted. The tightness in his face softened slightly. "I never thought about it that way," he admitted. "I've been so busy being disappointed that monastery. Life isn't what I imagined, that I haven't been actually present for the life I'm living." "Exactly," Hiroshi said gently. "And this is what most humans do constantly. We're so busy wishing our life were different, our circumstances were better, our experience matched our preferences, that we miss the actual life unfolding right here." Buddhist practice is learning to show up for the life we have, rather than the life we wish we had. They returned to their work, but Takeo's energy had changed. Hiroshi could see him trying to bring more presence to the simple act of carrying wood, could see the moment-to-moment effort to release resistance and just be with what was actually happening. It wasn't perfect. Old patterns reasserted themselves frequently, but the willingness to practice was itself a profound shift. This teaching about meeting life as it is rather than as we wish it would be sits at the very heart of Buddhist wisdom. So much of human suffering comes from this constant argument with reality, this insistence that things should be other than they are. We think we'll be happy when we get the job, the relationship, the achievement, the circumstance we're seeking. But even when we get those things, the mind immediately begins to worry about losing them or to focus on what's still not right. The practice of equanimity doesn't mean we stop having preferences or stop working to improve our circumstances. Hiroshi still preferred calligraphy to carrying firewood, but he no longer made his peace dependent on getting his preference. He could be at peace while carrying firewood because his peace was no longer conditional on circumstances being a certain way. It was grounded in presence, in the capacity to be with what is without constant resistance. Notice in your own experience right now what you might be resisting, perhaps some discomfort in your body, perhaps some sound in your environment, perhaps the fact that you're not yet asleep. What happens when you stop arguing with what's already true and simply acknowledge it? Body sensations are present, sounds are occurring, sleep has not yet come. These are just facts, neutral observations, requiring no emotional reaction. The peace you're seeking is not on the other side of circumstances changing. It's in this shift of relationship with whatever circumstances are present. When you can be with difficulty without resistance, you've found something more valuable than the absence of difficulty. You've found a peace that circumstances cannot take away. Let your awareness rest now in simple presence, not trying to create any special state, not resisting what's here, just being aware that you're aware, breathing, sensing, hearing, thinking, all of it simply arising and passing in the vast spaciousness of consciousness that you are. In a valley where 3 rivers met and where morning fog would rise, like silk curtains slowly drawn back to reveal the day, there lived a potter named Midori who had studied her craft for 30 years. She could throw vessels of exquisite beauty, each piece perfectly balanced and proportioned. Her work was sought after by tea masters and collectors throughout the region. But Midori carried a secret sorrow that she shared with no one. Despite her technical mastery and the beauty of her creations, she felt that something essential was missing from her work. Her pieces were perfect but somehow lifeless, technically flawless but lacking the quality of spirit she saw in the work of the great ancient masters. She had achieved everything she had worked toward, yet she felt increasingly hollow, as if her success were an elaborate disguise covering a fundamental failure. One autumn, a famous Zen master named Sengai was traveling through the region and stayed for several days at the local temple. Midori, hearing of his presence, brought him one of her finest pieces as an offering. It was a tea bowl of extraordinary beauty, the glaze a perfect gradient from deep blue to pale celadon. The form so balanced it seemed to float despite its weight. Sengai received the bowl with proper respect, turning it slowly in his hands, examining it from every angle. His weathered fingers traced the curves with careful attention. After a long silence, he looked at Midori and asked, "Tell me, when you made this bowl, where were you?" Midori was confused by the question. "I was in my studio, of course. At my wheel." The master shook his head gently. "Your body was at the wheel, but where was your mind? Where was your heart? Where was your spirit when your hands shaped this clay?" Midori felt defensive. "I was concentrating on creating a perfect bowl, on getting every detail correct, on making something worthy of a master like yourself." "Exactly," Sengai said, and there was compassion in his eyes. "You were trying to create perfection. You were reaching towards some ideal in your mind, but you were not here, present with the clay, present with the moment of creation itself. This bowl is technically flawless, but it has no breath in it. It's like a person who has stopped breathing but whose heart still beats. The form is present, but the life is absent." He set the bowl down carefully. "May I ask you something personal? Are you happy in your work?" The question pierced Midori's carefully maintained composure. Tears came to her eyes before she could stop them. "No," she admitted quietly. "I am successful, but I am not happy. Every piece I make feels like a test I'm trying to pass. I can never relax into the process because I'm constantly judging whether it's good enough, whether it will match my reputation, whether it will satisfy others' expectations." Sengai nodded as if this confirmed something he already knew. "This is the suffering that comes from what we call in Zen, gaining mind. You approach your work as if you need to gain something through it, approval, validation, proof of your worth. But true mastery comes not from gaining but from being, not from trying to prove something but from expressing what is already complete within you." He invited her to sit with him. "Let me tell you a story about a monk named Bankei who lived 200 years ago. Bankei was a brilliant student of Zen who studied intensely for years, traveling from teacher to teacher, practicing the most rigorous disciplines. He nearly destroyed his health through his extreme efforts to achieve enlightenment. And then one day, exhausted from years of striving, he simply gave up. He stopped trying to become enlightened and just sat beneath a tree, completely defeated. And in that moment of giving up, in that total abandonment of the project of becoming someone other than who he was, he suddenly recognized what had been true all along, that his fundamental nature was already awake, already complete, already whole. The enlightenment he had been seeking desperately was not something to be achieved in the future, but something to be recognized in the present." Sengai looked directly at Midori. "You are like Bankei before his awakening. You are trying to become a great potter through perfect technique and achievement. But greatness in any art comes not from perfect technique, but from wholeness of being, from showing up completely to the moment of creation, not trying to prove anything, not reaching towards some future accomplishment, but simply being present with clay and wheel and the miracle of form emerging from formlessness." "But how do I do that?" Midori asked. "How do I stop trying when trying is all I know?" "You begin by recognizing that this very question comes from the same gaining mind," Sengai said with a gentle smile. "You want to know how to achieve non-striving, which is itself a form of striving. The shift cannot be made through more effort or technique. It comes through understanding and relaxation." He suggested a practice. "Tomorrow, go to your studio. But instead of trying to make a perfect bowl or any particular kind of bowl, simply play with the clay, not working toward any goal, not judging the results, just being present with the feeling of clay responding to your hands. Like a child playing in mud, completely absorbed in the immediate experience without any thought of outcome or achievement." Midori felt resistance to this suggestion. It seemed irresponsible, even wasteful, to use her time and materials for mere play, but something in Sengai's presence, in the authority of his own being, made her willing to try. The next morning, she went to her studio with intention to follow Sengai's instruction. She took a lump of clay, placed it on the wheel, and began to work with it. But immediately, her habitual patterns reasserted themselves. She found herself judging each movement, critiquing the form taking shape, comparing it to her idea of what it should be. The gaining mind was so deeply ingrained that she couldn't simply turn it off. She stopped, took a breath, and tried again. This time, when she noticed herself judging or striving, she would gently acknowledge, "There's the gaining mind again." And she would return to simple presence with the immediate sensations, the wetness of the clay, the pressure of her hands, the spinning of the wheel, the gradual emergence of form. For the first hour, this was a constant cycle: judge, notice, return, judge, notice, return. But gradually the judgments became less frequent. Gaps appeared where there was simply creating, simply being with the clay and the wheel and the moment. And in those gaps, something different began to happen. Her hands moved with a spontaneity they hadn't had in years. The forms emerging were imperfect by her usual standards, asymmetrical in places, irregular in ways she would normally correct. But they had something her perfect bowls lacked. They had life. They breathed. They carried the presence of the moment of their creation. Midori worked like this for several hours, creating piece after piece without judgment or goal. Some collapsed, some took unexpected forms, some were genuinely ugly by conventional standards. But the process itself was joyful in a way her work hadn't been since she was a young apprentice first discovering the magic of clay. When Sengai visited her studio that evening, she showed him what she had made. He examined each piece carefully, and his face broke into a wide smile. "Now you are beginning to understand. Look at this one." He held up a small bowl that was slightly lopsided, the glaze uneven, the form irregular. "This has your breath in it. This was made by someone who was actually present, actually alive in the moment of creation. It's not perfect, but it's real. And real is always more valuable than perfect." Midori looked at the bowl with new eyes. She had been about to discard it, to judge it as a failure because it didn't meet her usual standards. But now she could see what Sengai saw, the vitality in it, the authenticity, the sense that a human being with all their imperfection and aliveness had shaped this clay. "This doesn't mean you abandon your skill and training," Sengai clarified. "Your 30 years of practice have given you tremendous capacity. But now you must learn to let that capacity express itself naturally rather than controlling and directing it with gaining mind. Let your hands do what they know how to do. Let your experience serve the moment of creation rather than some future goal of perfection." He offered her an image that would stay with her for the rest of her life. Think of a bird in flight. The bird doesn't think about flying. It doesn't try to fly perfectly or judge whether its flying is good enough. It simply flies, responding to the air and the moment with the skills that have become part of its nature. This is how you must approach your wheel. Not thinking about pottery, not trying to create masterpieces, but simply being present with clay with all your skill available, but not directed by gaining mind. Over the months that followed, Midori's work underwent a transformation. She continued to practice her craft with discipline and care, but she did so with a different quality of being. She was present with the process rather than fixated on the outcome. She allowed imperfection to exist alongside her skill. She trusted her hands to express what wanted to emerge, rather than forcing clay to conform to predetermined ideas. The change was visible in her work. Her pieces became more varied, more alive, more authentic. Some were still technically flawless, but now they also breathed. Others had imperfections that somehow made them more beautiful, more human. Tea masters who collected her work began to comment that something had changed, that her recent pieces had a quality her earlier work, despite its perfection, had lacked. But more importantly, Midori herself had changed. The hollowness she had carried for years had been filled not with achievement or validation, but with the simple joy of being present with her craft. She was no longer trying to prove her worth through perfect pottery. She was expressing her being through the medium of clay, and that expression was enough. One afternoon, nearly a year after her encounter with Sengai, a young apprentice came to study with Midori. The girl was talented but plagued by the same gaining mind that had once tormented Midori. She would become frustrated when pieces didn't turn out perfectly, would judge herself harshly for mistakes, would compare her work to Midori's with visible despair. Midori recognized herself in this young woman. One day, as the apprentice sat crying over a bowl that had cracked in the kiln, Midori sat beside her and shared what Sengai had taught her. "You think this cracked bowl represents your failure?" Midori said gently. "But what if it's teaching you something more important than how to make perfect bowls? What if it's showing you the difference between being present with the process and being attached to the outcome?" The apprentice looked up, confused. "But isn't the outcome the point? Aren't we trying to make beautiful pottery?" "We are making pottery, yes. But beautiful is a judgment, a concept in the mind. What happens before that judgment? There is clay, water, fire, hands moving in space, form emerging. All of this is complete in itself, requiring no judgment to validate its existence. When you can be present with the actual process of creation, receiving each moment as it unfolds, then the outcome, whether it matches your preferences or not, cannot disturb your peace." She picked up the cracked bowl. "Look at this with fresh eyes, not with the judgment of success or failure, but with simple presence. What do you actually see?" The apprentice wiped her tears and looked at the bowl. After a moment, she said quietly, "The crack creates a pattern I could never have planned. It's almost like lightning frozen in the clay." "Yes," Midori said. "The Japanese have a practice called kintsugi, where they repair broken pottery with gold, highlighting the cracks rather than hiding them. They understand that the breakage and repair are part of the object's history, making it more valuable, not less. What if you approached your entire practice this way? What if every imperfection, every failure, every crack was an opportunity to see beauty you couldn't have planned, to learn something you couldn't have learned from success?" The apprentice was quiet, taking this in. Finally she asked, "But how do I stop judging? The judgments just come automatically." "They do come automatically at first," Midori agreed. "This is the habit of mind we've all been trained in. But you can practice a different relationship with judgment. When you notice yourself judging, don't judge the judgment. Simply notice, oh, there's a judgment about this bowl. There's a thought that this is failure. Acknowledge it the way you might acknowledge a cloud passing through the sky. Present, but temporary. True, but not the whole truth." She continued, "The whole truth is larger than any judgment. Yes, this bowl cracked, that's a fact. But is it a failure? Only if you define success so narrowly that anything other than your expectation counts as failure. What if success means showing up fully to the process? What if success means learning something with each piece you make? What if success means touching the clay with presence and care, regardless of outcome? Then even cracked bowls can be successes." The teaching Sengai had given to Midori, which she was now passing on to her apprentice, points toward one of Zen Buddhism's most essential insights, that the gaining mind, the constant reaching toward future achievement, prevents us from being present with the completeness of this moment. We are always becoming, never being, always trying to get somewhere else, never arriving here. This pattern extends far beyond pottery or spiritual practice. It pervades modern life. We finish one goal and immediately set another, never pausing to be present with what we've accomplished. We're always preparing for the future, rarely present for the now. We judge each moment by whether it's moving us toward our goals, missing the intrinsic value of the moment itself. The invitation is to discover what Midori discovered, that wholeness is not found in achievement but in presence. Not in becoming perfect, but in being completely here with your imperfect self and your imperfect circumstances. Not in controlling outcomes, but in showing up fully to the process and trusting what emerges. Feel into this teaching right now. Notice if there's a gaining mind even in this moment. Are you trying to fall asleep? Are you judging whether this is working? Are you reaching towards some future state of rest while missing the present experience of lying here, breathing, being held by whatever surface supports you? What if you released the gaining mind right now? What if you stopped trying to get somewhere and simply arrived where you already are? Your body breathing, sounds rising and falling, thoughts appearing and dissolving, sensations present in this moment, none of it requiring improvement, none of it needing to be different, simply life being life, consciousness being conscious, this moment being exactly this moment. The Buddha taught that craving, tanha, is the root of suffering, but craving is just another word for gaining mind. The constant reaching for what we don't have, the constant pushing away of what we do have, the refusal to be present with what is because we're so focused on what should be. When this craving relaxes, when the gaining mind settles, what remains is simple presence, and in that presence there is already a completeness that needs nothing added. Let yourself feel this completeness now. You don't need to achieve anything in this moment. You don't need to become anyone other than who you are. You don't need to fix anything or improve anything or make anything happen. Right now, in this very moment, you can simply be, and that being is enough. More than enough. It is everything. As you rest in this recognition, let your body settle more deeply. Let your breath slow naturally. Let thoughts become less important, less compelling, less necessary to follow. They're still there, still arising, but you're no longer gripping them. You're like the sky that watches clouds pass without trying to hold them or push them away. In this letting go of the gaining mind, in this release of the need to become something other than what you are, there is profound peace. Not the peace of achieving some goal, but the peace of recognizing that the goal was always here, has always been here, waiting for you to stop seeking long enough to notice its presence. You are already whole. You are already complete. You are already home. Everything you've been seeking exists in this very moment when you stop seeking and simply be. The Buddhist path is sometimes described as a pathless path, because ultimately there is nowhere to go. You are not traveling from an unenlightened state to an enlightened state, from a bad self to a good self, from suffering to liberation. You are recognizing what has always been true, that your fundamental nature is awareness itself, spacious and clear and inherently at peace, and that all the suffering comes from forgetting this and identifying instead with the changing contents of awareness. Tonight, as you drift towards sleep, you can rest in this recognition. You are not the thoughts that come and go. You are not the emotions that arise and pass. You are not the sensations that pulse through your body. You are the awareness that witnesses all of this, unchanged by any of it, as vast and clear as the night sky holding countless stars. Rest as this awareness now. Let everything else be as it is. Let sleep come when it comes. Let thoughts think themselves. Let breath breathe. Let the body do what bodies do. And simply be the knowing presence in which all of this occurs, peaceful because peace is your nature, whole because wholeness is what you are. In ancient monasteries, in simple pottery studios, in mountain villages and coastal towns, in every place where humans have sought to understand the nature of suffering and the path to peace, the teaching has always been the same. Stop seeking, stop becoming. Stop trying to be anywhere other than here. Meet this moment with complete presence and discover that what you've been searching for has been here all along. The teachings we've explored tonight, through stories of monks and potters, farmers and fishermen, grieving widows and angry men, all point toward this one recognition. That acceptance is not resignation but clear seeing. That presence is not a state to achieve but what you are. That letting go is not loss but liberation. That peace is not found in perfect circumstances but in changing your relationship with any circumstances. These are not just beautiful ideas to contemplate. They are invitations to direct experience, to recognition, to awakening to what is true. And that awakening is available in every essence, moment, including this one, not someday when you've practiced enough or understood enough or become enough. Right here, right now, in this very moment, as the night deepens around you and the world grows quiet, let these teachings settle into your being not as concepts to remember but as truth to embody. The Buddha's final words to his disciples were, "Be a lamp unto yourself." He was not telling them to become enlightened or to achieve some special state. He was reminding them that the light of awareness they sought was already present within them, had always been present, would always be present. You are that light. Not the light you will become after years of practice, or the light you'll discover when conditions are perfect. The light that is aware of these words right now, the consciousness that knows your experience in this moment, that is the lamp. It has never been extinguished. It cannot be extinguished. It has only sometimes been forgotten, overlooked, ignored in favor of the constant pursuit of something else, somewhere else, someone else. Tonight, you can stop pursuing. You can arrive where you already are. You can rest as what you have always been, the awareness that watches thoughts without being thoughts, the space that holds emotions without being emotions, the consciousness that knows sensations without being sensations. This is your true home, and the door has always been open. Feel how your body has been slowly relaxing as these teachings have unfolded. This relaxation is not something you created through effort. It emerged naturally when the gaining mind began to release, when the constant pushing and pulling and striving started to settle. Your body knows how to rest. It has always known. It was only the mind's constant interference that prevented this natural settling. Notice how your breathing has changed. Slower now, deeper, more settled. Again, not through effort but through release. When you stop managing and controlling and trying to make things be a certain way, the wisdom of your body expresses itself naturally. The breath breathes, the heart beats. Life lives itself through you, requiring no help from the thinking mind. This is the great paradox at the heart of Buddhist teaching. The more you try to achieve peace, the more you push it away. The more you strive for enlightenment, the more you reinforce the illusion that you are not already awake. The more you work to become someone worthy of happiness, the more you affirm the belief that you are not already worthy just as you are. But when you release the trying, when you let go of the project of self-improvement, when you stop demanding that this moment be different than it is, something miraculous reveals itself. You discover that what you were seeking so desperately was never absent. Peace is the nature of awareness itself. Wholeness is your fundamental state. You have been complete all along. The stories we've shared tonight, each one carries this same teaching in different clothing. The young monk learning that thoughts are not the enemy. The grieving widow discovering that resistance causes more suffering than loss itself. The angry fisherman finding that acceptance of his emotions transforms his relationship with them. The scholar realizing that intellectual knowledge is not the same as embodied wisdom. the guilt-ridden farmer learning that self-punishment serves no one. Each story, each teaching, each moment of insight points toward the same truth, that freedom comes not from changing your circumstances or fixing yourself or achieving some future state, but from meeting what is actually here with complete presence and acceptance. This is the path. This is the practice. This is the liberation that the Buddha pointed toward 25 centuries ago and that remains as available now as it was then. As sleep begins to pull you gently into its embrace, you can trust this process completely. Sleep is not something you do. It's something that happens when you stop doing. When the mind finally releases its grip on controlling and planning and worrying and striving, sleep comes. Naturally, like water flowing downhill, like leaves falling in autumn, like all natural processes that unfold perfectly when we stop interfering. You have been holding on so tightly for so long, holding on to control, to certainty, to the illusion that if you just try hard enough you can make life be exactly as you want it. But life is like water. The tighter you grip, the more it slips through your fingers. When you open your hands and simply let life be what it is, you discover that what you were trying to hold on to was always here, always available, never actually in danger of leaving. Let your hands open now, literally or metaphorically. Feel what it's like to release your grip on this day, on your worries about tomorrow, on your regrets about yesterday, on your judgments about yourself, on your resistance to what is. Just for this moment, just for tonight, let it all go. Place it down like Takeshi placing his stone in the river. Watch it dissolve into the flowing water of this present moment. The Buddha taught that all conditioned things are impermanent. Every experience you've ever had has arisen and passed. Every thought, every emotion, every sensation, every circumstance, all of it temporary, all of it changing, all of it flowing like the river that never holds the same water twice. This impermanence, which the mind often fears, is actually the source of great freedom, because it means that no difficult state is permanent, no suffering lasts forever, no darkness can extinguish the light of awareness that witnesses all changing conditions. Right now, as you rest here, you can feel this truth. The thoughts that seemed so urgent an hour ago have passed. The concerns that felt so heavy have lightened. The tension that gripped your body has softened. All of it changing, all of it impermanent, all of it simply weather passing through the vast sky of your awareness. And that awareness, that consciousness that has been present through every moment of your life, through every changing condition, through every joy and sorrow, through every success and failure, that awareness has never changed. It is always here, always now, always clear and spacious and at peace. This is what you are beneath all the temporary conditions. This is your Buddha nature, your awakened awareness, your true home. Rest here now, not trying to maintain any special state, not worried about whether you're doing this correctly, not concerned about when sleep will come. Simply being the awareness that you are, spacious enough to hold everything, peaceful enough to need nothing, complete enough to lack nothing. The teachings have been transmitted, the stories have been told, the wisdom has been shared. Now there is simply this: breath moving, body resting, awareness present, peace settling like snow falling on quiet mountains, covering everything in its gentle white silence. You are held, you are safe, you are exactly where you need to be, and in this moment, that is enough. More than enough. It is everything. May you rest deeply in the peace that is your nature. May you wake tomorrow remembering what these teachings pointed toward. May this recognition of your true nature as spacious awareness become the ground from which you meet all of life. Thank you for walking this path with us tonight. The journey has brought you home to yourself. Rest now, dear friend. You have arrived.